Welcome to the Middle Tech Podcast, this region's leading business podcast shining a light on technology, entrepreneurship, and the future of business in Kentucky and beyond. Our goal is to advance the ecosystem by bringing attention to the founders, changemakers, innovators, and those supporting them. Middle Tech's content can be found on your favorite podcast streaming app, social channels, and YouTube. We encourage you to follow and participate in the conversation. Let's discuss and build the future.
All right, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Evan Knowles and Logan Jones here. We sat down with Space Tango, who is a company here in Lexington that is just wild to think about the fact that they're in Lexington in the first place. So they work with SpaceX. They are in the business of space. They send stuff up to the space station, and they're located just right downtown Lexington. So it's just crazy to think about that happening in Kentucky, and not many people know about that. I would imagine.
Yeah, that was one of the coolest parts of the interview. If you're able to, go and watch the YouTube video, because during the interview behind Twyman, there's actually a live stream of a mission of theirs in the International Space Station. So you're able to literally see what's going on in the International Space Station from their ground control here in Lexington, Kentucky. And like Evan said, it's one of those things that you just wouldn't realize is happening here in Lexington. Also in the video, you'll be able to see what Space Tango is actually sending up into space. So sitting beside Twyman is the actual box that they put these experiments in, and they're automating these science experiments, whether it's they're studying the effects of microgravity on human cells or on how a plant grows, or all sorts of different things that we discussed in this interview. All of that is happening on an automated basis within that little cube lab, as they call them. So again, they're dealing in space, which is something that you don't typically associate businesses that work in Kentucky doing. They have offices all over the country, but the majority of their employees are working here in Lexington. So
he's actually going down to Cape Canaveral next week.
Yeah, I think a launch is coming back.
Yeah, they're receiving a launch.
So. Yeah, that's so cool, man.
Yeah.
I asked him if he was a space entrepreneur. He said he doesn't call himself that, but I'm going to refer to him as a space entrepreneur.
But it was a cool conversation. We covered everything from how the company got started here in Kentucky. What does the general space industry look like? What is SpaceX doing with satellite internet and Starlink, which is really exciting because, as you wrote in the past, that has a lot of implications for Kentucky. We talked about the future of space commercialization in general. So what that means is, several times throughout history, the government has slowly given space up to private industry. And so what that means is a private company can come in and now work in space. And before, it's only accessible to government officials and to government organizations like NASA, but they're starting to open that up to more companies like Space Tango. And Space Tango is really interesting because, he talked about this several times in the interview. They have kind of a lead. They were one of the first companies to get this kind of approval, and now they're taking all of their learnings and applying that to other technologies and other platforms, which is super exciting because early mover advantage is huge in new industries, especially space, because a lot of the experiments they do just can't be done on Earth. And so it takes sending stuff up to space and failing and iterating in space before you can actually get some good data. Mm-hmm. So it's super exciting that that's happening in Kentucky. But very exciting conversation.
All right, guys. So before we dive into these interviews, we just want to take a second to highlight our sponsors. They're going to be sponsoring season 4 of the Middle Tech Podcast. So the first one I want to go over is Land Betterment Corporation. So they're going to be sponsoring, like I said, all of season 4, and they're working hard to bring sustainable developments to Eastern Kentucky, places that need it so badly. What they're doing is taking old and abandoned coal mines and strip mines and putting sustainable businesses in their place that can help support those communities. So definitely go and check them out. Their website is landbetterment.com. They're doing some awesome things in this region.
Yeah. Next we've got Brandon Johnson. So I've personally worked with Brandon Johnson. He is a lawyer and attorney that works with businesses, specifically startups in this region. He is from Kentucky. He's from Fordsville, Kentucky. He got his law degree from the University of Louisville. He's worked with Papa John's, Louisville Slugger, Instagram influencers that are making millions of dollars, real estate investors, you name it. But he loves what he does. He really loves helping small businesses, helping entrepreneurs get the right footing, because one of the most important parts of starting your business, if you're serious about it, is getting an attorney, making sure that all of your documents, incorporation documents, operating agreements, shareholder, agreements, things of those nature are in check. And Brandon is there to help you with that. And again, I've worked with him, and he does a great job. He makes it fun. He's very personable, and I enjoyed working with him. So we appreciate him for sponsoring this season.
All right, go ahead and dive into it.
All right, welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You've got Evan Knowles and Logan Jones here. We're recording out of Space Tango's offices in downtown Lexington. We've been in a lot of cool spots, and we've been in Louisville, we've been in Moorhead, mostly out of Awesome Inc. though. This has got to be one of the coolest spots, and for those of you watching the video on YouTube, you should be able to see the backdrop here behind Twyman.
Yeah,
he's got some awesome. What is this? A control center? How do you guys
mission
refer to
control?
this?
Yeah, this is a mission control for us. I'll explain a little bit more. I can see the reflection off the windows that are behind you all. So you're seeing on one side live streams from the space station, and you can actually see the Dragon 2, or maybe two of the Dragon 2 cargo vehicles docked to the space station. And then on the other side is a recorded video of Victor Glover, one of the U.S. astronauts on orbit, removing some of our equipment that. Here we're recording. That equipment's going to be coming home on January 10th. So just a few days, I think, after people might hear this. So that's what you're looking at if you're watching this.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's before we get into Space Tango and what people are looking at there, let's dive into you and your background.
Yeah,
so,
sure.
High level, briefly go over where you're from, education and professional background, up until Space Tango.
Yeah, sure. So, born and raised in Kentucky. I'm from Bardstown. Grew up on a cattle and tobacco farm in Bardstown, just outside of Bardstown. So where people listening, I think most people will know, but that's where all the bourbon distilleries are. So that was certainly something I grew up around. Now the bourbon industry really took off after I graduated high school. But it's been fun to see that, and a lot of my friends work in that industry. Grew up on a farm. I have three brothers, and we're all actually mechanical engineers. So for any intrepid UK students on the maybe listening to this, there's a brick in the UK courtyard there, engineering courtyard, with the Clements brothers on there. I actually have one cousin also who graduated around the same time. But we all work in different areas. And growing up on a farm, my dad worked in agriculture, but very much had the engineering kind of spirit. So learned from him. Actually, both my parents ended up eventually starting businesses, later in their careers. So got a little bit of that entrepreneurial, saw that from them. But went to UK, kind of followed my brothers. Had dreams of having a track and cross country career, but found, realized I could run for the rest of my life. I didn't need to get a scholarship for that. So ended up going to UK doing engineering, and was an okay student. I'm gonna be honest, wasn't great, but got through all the classes. But really, it's funny. There are certain moments that really change the trajectory of your life, and one for me was Dr. Jim Lump, who's actually still at UK. He gave a talk in a mechanical engineering class I was in about a space group that was at the time called Kentucky Space that was working on a satellite. I followed him right after class up and asked, I was interested, kind of thinking it was a group that met for pizza every couple of weeks to talk about space and stuff like that. It ended up being a job, and kind of the rest is history. And, who knows what would have happened if I hadn't followed him that one day, but that was really and it was a quick 10-minute talk, followed him, and that kind of led to this. So
had you been really interested in space growing up, or was it just one of those things that when you got to college and you saw that talk?
Yeah,
like,
it's actually funny. It was actually I was very interested when I was younger. Apollo 13 was a great movie to see how realistic it was, and talking to my parents that actually happened. That wasn't sci-fi. If I could, I would love to, but I had English is not my strongest subject, and was certainly not in high school. And I read like the space section of the encyclopedia in my English teacher's class probably once a week, just kind of seeing it. Because again, reading that, being 40 years removed from the moon missions at that point, knowing that we did that, but it seemed like sci-fi to me was so cool. but then never really pursued it in any way in college or anything else like that, thinking that you could do it because the space world we know now didn't really exist. SpaceX is obviously the greatest example of that, and didn't really pursue it. And then, that opportunity came, and, we'll talk maybe a little bit about the company formation, but it was never an epiphany, and I think that's a common theme about Space Tango is it's hard, consistent work to build, a company. That's true in a lot of ways, but really my career, it was never one of these, eureka moments or anything like that.
Go into and lead this into Space Tango, but go
Sure.
into the history of space in Kentucky, because
Yeah.
Kentucky's obviously, when somebody thinks of Kentucky, they're probably not going to think space.
No,
But-
there's not a ton.
Go into that.
Yeah, the little bit that I know is that actually at UK they had, and I don't know the exact history, so I'm sure somebody will comment this when this comes out, but that the university had a pretty large life-size centrifuge that they used for early hypergravity testing in the early NASA days. That I believe they used some of the primates. I don't think it was Ham who was like the first primate the U.S. sent up, but some of those primates I think actually were tested there in what was the Warner Grin Biomedical Engineering Building that has now been torn down, and I believe there's a new science building there now. I actually kind of discovered that fact much after we got started. The space history here that has really kind of formed what is worked on in Kentucky, particularly in the Lexington kind of east area, was the Kentucky Science and Technology Corporation about 15 years ago started a program called Kentucky Space that was led by Chris Kimmel, who is a co-founder of Space Tango and a mentor and a great friend of mine, and somebody who this wouldn't be here, I wouldn't be here without his mentorship and working to help start this company. But they had started Space Tango, I believe, or what was called Kentucky Space, about 2006, and it was a coalition of different universities working on space projects, basically just to get students in Kentucky working on stuff. And it was good timing because CubeSats were just coming out, which are very, very, for those who don't know, are satellites about the size anywhere from a tissue box to, maybe like a small microwave. Just really, and what that was taking satellites, instead of being these vehicle size pieces of equipment that really only companies could spend hundreds of $millions of dollars to launch. What if we just went 2 factors, or a magnitude down to build them for students? And that has become its own industry that we can kind of talk about. But Kentucky Space was getting started at that time. And that is that lab I talked about with Dr. Jim Lump. And an equivalent was one at Morehead State with Ben Malfris. And they built the Space Science Center, which has become its own entity. And they've made a name for themselves. And we've hired students from there. And Ben, again, has also been a great mentor and friend in that. And worked through that Kentucky Space program. Kentucky Space started to kind of fizzle out about 2013, 2014 due to a variety of reasons, but we'd launched a couple of CubeSats. The Space Science Center has done great. UK Engineering has gone, I believe now has an aerospace engineering major, or if they don't, I think that it's coming soon. And the idea for Space Tango, we kind of had worked on some space station stuff earlier and kind of pursued that idea. And over time, the ambition kind of grew. We saw where we were, that it was a unique idea. And then the ambition grew to kind of what it is today and then where we want to go. So, we're really very much in the first, you pick your analogy, baseball innings book. We're very much very early on in the history of this company and what we want to do. And I think as a society or as a nation, what is going to become kind of the space economy over the next decade? It's going to be pretty interesting to see.
Absolutely. So let's transition that into
Sure.
How do you describe what Space Tango does?
Yeah.
And what the mission of Space Tango is?
Yeah. So really what we're looking to do is utilize the unique environment of space, particularly microgravity, which we'll talk about what that is, as this new platform for research and manufacturing. And how we do that is we basically build, with what's going on behind me, to utilize that takes a unique skill set. And a lot of that is automation. A lot of that is building equipment that can operate through a number of different gravity fields. So 1G, 3 or 4 Gs during launch, 0G for a month or two, and then a couple Gs coming back home. And that is really difficult to do for like a life science payload. If you're trying to keep, a stem cell culture or a tissue chip or some other things like that alive. And so that's kind of how we accomplish that. But really what we're trying to do is build the equipment to utilize this unique environment to create products that obviously, are for the betterment of humanity. And so like an analogy that we think about, that we kind of communicate this to, is as you think about, human history, every time humanity has really harnessed a new physics medium or environment, there's been technology's been based off that, and then there's been capital creation. So you can think about, electromagnetism, which has created radar, wireless signals that have created really the digital world that we know today. Electricity obviously has created the modern world. Vacuum doesn't sound very difficult. Vacuum is just taking air or a medium out of a volume, but allows you to create refrigeration, which allows you to create store vaccines or food or other things like that. And so gravity is just one of those those mediums. I mean, we know it obviously, and humanity knows it because it's the only force we've ever really known and interacted with. But when you remove gravity, it just creates a new platform, kind of a new obviously environment, literally, that things interact differently. And so you can use that to an advantage for layer deposition work, stem cell pluripotency, some of these other things that we'll talk about. And we really just are focused on working with our partners on utilizing this to create things that could never have been created. And it's a lot of fun because you're doing cutting edge science. You're working with great, world-class teams, building stuff that, the ideas are generated in this building, are usually built downstairs. And then, we get to watch them, a couple days later on the screens behind me. So, but that's really what we're trying to do here. And for us, as we grow, we're trying to diversify those use cases, that what we kind of call applications, diversify those number of applications for kind of industrial uses, build the equipment to enable that, and then use or develop the infrastructure that's being developed with it, whether it's a SpaceX or a Rocket Lab or all these other kind of infrastructure players, use them to really build out this ecosystem.
Yeah, we were here prior to this interview, and we got a tour, which was awesome. It was really cool to walk through here and look at what you guys are doing in this office right downtown Kentucky. And when you drive by, you'd have no idea. Yeah. Right. It's just such an inconspicuous building. You say, what is going on right here in Lexington? And that's what I was thinking when I left this place. And we were shown, these cubes that you guys are building. So I want you to talk about those. And then earlier you mentioned, microgravity, and talk about how those cubes are, harnessing and allowing you guys to use this microgravity, as you call it, as a platform.
Yeah. So, it's an interesting thing in kind of sales and stuff like that, because we basically developed, they're called cube labs, and basically all the photos you'll see, they're metal boxes on the exterior. And the reason they're built that way is obviously just for ease of the astronauts using them. Astronaut time is valued anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 an hour, fully burdened. Now, obviously, we don't pay that; NASA pays that. But if you took the value of all their training and divided it in half, so we want to minimize astronaut time. So basically, we build these autonomous boxes that have an experiment. And if you're doing cell culture work, you're keeping a cell line warm at 37 C at body temperature. You're maintaining typically a gas concentration. You're feeding it with a media that typically has to be cold before it goes into the incubation part. Typically, they like to save the food after it's consumed, or the media called effluent, to do analysis. Then you typically want to image that, and so you've got to fit all that in a box, that goes in a bag or goes in a different locker, flies up, and basically just gets a power and internet connection, and then runs autonomously. And so it's that kind of autonomy, designing for that autonomy is the difficult part. And one thing that we really learned, and Space Tango, Kentucky Space, really got its start as kind of the maker movement was kind of hitting its kind of peak a little bit in the sense that, it was when everyone kind of thought 3D printers would be everywhere and Lowe's and everything else like that. And, Arduinos were really coming out. So you think, okay, I can put these 3 or 4 things together and create whatever. Yeah. And we started there, but you quickly learn that, making something that can work for 10 minutes is very different than something that can work for, a month and be, randomly powered off due to something and come back up. And so that was some of the stuff we had to learn in our early phase. But the Cube Labs are, for us, they're the experiment modules. So they look kind of boring on the outside, but there's a lot packed in on the inside. And something that we're trying to do with our media and our messaging is to show what's the complexity of what's going on those insides. But the other thing is, once you get in zero gravity, the best 2 examples of trying to design around are, one, bubbles are, don't sound like a big deal, but are a huge pain for us in fluid lines because, on Earth, there's density due to, and bubbles will float to the top of whatever vessel they're typically in. In zero gravity, there is no density because, and so those bubbles don't go to where you think they're going to go. And so you have to be either clever about getting them trapped into, high surface area energy areas to hold them so that they don't clog something, or if they do clog something, getting them out of there one way or another. So bubbles are a big one. And then the other is heat generation, particularly in if you have heat generation in space, in a vacuum, it's all radiative heat transfer. But in the space station where there's air, basically heat just generates and creates a bulb of hot air. So you have to have, kind of forced airflow. So there's all these different things that you have to design. It's on Earth, it's not on Earth, and it's back at the same time.
Okay, so how do you design and iterate? I guess there's microgravity like stations on Earth, right, that we can create? So
no.
Okay, so how do you iterate on this product, like without setting it to?
You basically have to, okay. And so that's the hard part, but that's the part, we almost see value in the complexity because and it's interesting because as we talk to investors or customers or everything else like that, we talk about building out this, what we're trying to build within Space Tango is this combination of this science with these use cases, these applications I talked about, but then also this repository of kind of the engineering knowledge of how do you design these systems in zero gravity. So there are zero gravity analogs. So, you can work from about a second or two with drop towers. Actually, one of our employees here is from Portland State. Portland State, actually, in their engineering building has a large drop tower that goes through the engineering building. And it's literally, you just drop stuff. And so you get that kind of, the roller coaster feeling, right, of going over a hill in a car. You drop something, you get a little bit of microgravity. A lot of that's for fluid studies. How do fluids kind of behave in a zero gravity environment? So you've got that can give you a few seconds, a little bit work can be done there. There are, really nice drop towers. I think there's one in Germany that's, 100 and something meters tall that they actually evacuate all the air out of before you drop something, things like that. But that is not the time scale that you would have for any type of things that we're looking at. You can do the vomit comet, which is basically, for space nerds will probably know that, but that's how they shot Apollo 13. It's basically an airplane that basically does parabolas. So it goes up pretty high and then does like a 45-degree angle down, and with engines on, and basically dives towards the ground. I think they stay between 18 and 30,000 feet, so you don't get too close. But they basically just do that, and that gives you about 30 seconds. So that's the one where you see people and they're like in a plane.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, they start floating. Okay. Yeah, that only gives you about 30 seconds. It's repeatable. Only gives you about 30 seconds. You've now got some suborbital opportunities. Blue Origin has one. That gives you about 3 or 4 minutes on their new Shepard rocket. And there's value in each one of these steps. But that gives you about 3 or 4 minutes. And then the only way to have kind of microgravity for any long duration of time, you have to orbit a celestial body to basically, once you're in orbit, basically the centrifugal force equals the force of gravity, and you're basically in free fall. And so really the space station or some sort of spacecraft that you would develop is the only way you could get any type of long-term microgravity. And that's one of the things, we talk about, as we go out and talk to people, there's space and then there's microgravity, and those are two separate but interrelated concepts. So, space is basically an altitude. So, you could go straight up and be in space, but if you're not in orbit, you just fall right back down. Earth, if you go up to the height of the space station, the altitude of the space station, gravity is 98 or 99% the same force. It'll just pull you right back down. So that's why when you watch rocket launches, they go up for a little while and then they go sideways for most of it, because they're getting horizontal velocity to stay in orbit. And that staying in orbit is what gives you the microgravity, which is what we're trying to capitalize on. So space to us is a means to an end. We just need, you just so happen to have to be in space to maintain microgravity. So that's that's kind of the differentiation for us. But we still get to be on cool rockets and stuff like that.
So one of the things that popped into my head when we were thinking about doing this interview and talking to you guys is the logistics of getting to space. We're just now figuring out how to really perfect logistics here on Earth.
Right.
Amazon figuring out how to get a package from point A to point B. Talk a little bit about the logistics of getting one of those cube labs from Lexington, Kentucky to the International Space Station, because I know it's like you got to connect the dots of putting it on a SpaceX rocket.
Right.
Then you've got to actually get it on the International Space Station. And one of the other questions I have that kind of goes along with that is it as simple as just having the funding to do it, or is there a lot of regulation you have to go through? What does that part of it look like?
Yeah, so there's two answers there. Almost three. So one is, how do you get something on a vehicle like that and use the space station? And this goes back and give credit to KSTC and Kentucky Space. Why, how we got started was NASA was beginning to commercialize, kind of quote unquote, about 10 years ago. And the Kentucky Space and then Space Tango were able to get Space Act agreements, which are basically these agreements to say you can use the space station for commercial purposes, to start to build companies. And if you think about a national laboratory, the space station is a national lab. There are other national labs, I believe Sandia, Oak Ridge, mostly around kind of nuclear, that are, government-only facilities that they have kind of opened up for commercial uses. So the space station is one of those. And so we got one of those, built a relationship with NASA to be able to even go to the space station. So that's kind of the first part. The second part there is it's really the safety verification and planning. And so we have a office in Houston, Texas, just across from the Johnson Space Center, that does a lot of that. So we say, and I'll use the mission that's kind of going on behind me, SpaceX 21 as an example. All right, we're going to fly a tissue chip system. That's going to take 6 to 12 months of coordination with NASA, because it needs to go up in a powered locker. It needs to be moved fairly quickly onto the space station, plugged into data, plugged into the power and data of the space station. It needs to run for a couple of weeks. It needs to then be moved to a freezer. That freezer needs to be moved back into the Dragon. It needs to come home. And so it takes a lot of that coordination. And there's systems built up that were moved from the space shuttle onto the space station that are how you kind of track all that. But it takes a lot of coordination, because everything is obviously to the millimeter and to the gram of what's up, what's in there and what's not. So there's a process there. And then there is the kind of the last part to that is the actual, like, physically taking the thing. So there's a lot of engineering design, prototyping and things like that. And then to use the tissue chip example, we go down to Cape Canaveral. We actually have laboratories about 4 miles from the launch pad. We load the cube labs actually in sterile biosafety hoods, because they have to be done sterile so we don't get any infection, bacteria or virus infection of the samples. They're typically locked. We typically close them up about 24 hours before launch. They go into the facilities about a couple hours after that. We do a final weight and CG. And then this last mission, just using it, me and another employee actually had to go out on the crew arm and get to put it into the vehicle, into the capsule, and check it out and everything else like that, which was as cool as it sounds.
I'm sure.
So that was like 12 hours before launch, and then they close up the door and it launches. So, hopefully I haven't scared anybody off in that whole process, but it sum it up, it's a lot of work. It's fun to watch the process and understand the process so that as we design things, we get smarter about it and certainly learn from it. But, as I was telling you all before this got started, that mission SpaceX 21 will be coming home in a couple of days, and basically we'll be getting that hardware back, breaking everything apart, taking the samples, sending them to customers all across the country, and then bringing that hardware back here and recycle it for the next flight. So.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about the types of experiments you're doing in those cube labs. What kind of things are you sending up? Who are your clients? What are you finding for them?
So there's a couple, I break it down into a couple of different, there's kind of the types of science, and then there's kind of the where the motivation, where they're going in the long term. And so there's kind of what I would call as blue ocean science, which is what happens to this when it goes to space effectively. And we've done a lot of work, actually really cool work in plant science. We did something actually with the International Space Station National Lab in Marvel, which was kind of cool, around Guardians of the Galaxy, basically growing Groot in space, which was kind of fun. We actually did some beer malting, growing malt, or do beer malting with Budweiser. Got to work with Budweiser on that, which was pretty interesting.
Did they view those as actual like science experiments, or was that a marketing?
Marvel was kind of marketing. It was kind of STEM based. The Budweiser's actually done some releases about the work that they've done. Some of it was marketing. Kind of the first beer on Mars. As humanity expands out, they've taken alcohol with them. But they've also, there was a science part. I mean, the people we worked with were all scientists in their Barley, Barley research division. So it was actually very, our day-to-day interactions were all science-based.
Very cool.
Yeah, and really cool team, and learned a lot with them. We've done some microbiology, with different bacterias, we had actually a group of I think 8th graders do a research paper on a fungi they flew with us that was shown as a good radiation shield. So we had a petri dish kind of split, and we had radiation sensors on either side, and we grew fungi on one side and none on the other. And they actually got some cool research out of that. So that's kind of the research for research sake. And we also have some other ones with, the kind of academic level NIH, NSF's funded work there, looking at different tissue chips, looking at different, more complex work, looking at living systems, human living systems, like a lung on chip. We've got a brain on chip project. We've got, a bone cartilage project, a lot of different ones like that, just to see what's the human response in different scenarios, because you're only limited on how much you can do with the actual astronauts.
Yeah, and just to hit on that, what is a chip exactly for those?
Yeah, so I've mentioned that a couple of times. So that is almost a two technologies building on top of each other. So there's kind of the space flight automation, life science automation that we're doing. There is broadly kind of what are called tissue chips or organs on chips, which is a whole nother field that we don't do, but we work with many groups that do. One of those being a company called Emulate out of Boston that build organ on chips, and they're one can be a brain chip or a lung chip that are the cells of that particular type are grown in these small devices. You do flow media, or you actually can stretch them like mimicking like human breath, so that they, instead of growing kind of these 2D cultures of a particular cell line in a biolab, you're actually emulating how they would function in the body, giving them shear stresses as blood or different fluids are flowing by them like they are in a living system. And so these organ chips have had a lot of research both terrestrially and in space, because you can mimic more complex living systems, particularly human living systems, to do long duration space flight, pharmacological studies, other things like that. So that's been a big, focus of the NIH and the a little bit the NSF on those areas.
And when you're studying, these tissues, these human tissues, are you looking for? You'd mentioned a few reasons, but what are the other primary reasons? Disease and possibly, I read one of the articles around aging.
Yep.
Talk about, what kind of discoveries are possibly
Are
being
possible
made.
there. Yeah. So in those areas, it's looking at, accelerated aging. Zero gravity has kind of shown that you can, it accelerates some of the stressors in the body that accelerate aging. Obviously, because of orbit, actually, astronauts do get technically younger. Due to relativity, but it's only like a couple microseconds. So that's negated clearly. You can also do some pharmacological, because again, with the astronauts, you're very limited. They don't want to get too risky with the astronauts. You don't want them getting sick or doing anything that's a little bit crazy. So you can do a few things, be a little bit more cavalier, if you will, in some of the research. Because obviously it's no person's going to be any way affected. So you've got aging. There's quite a bit of work obviously in osteoporosis, and because they have such a loss of bone density, astronauts do. They actually have to work out quite a bit when they're in orbit because like any stressor, when there's no load on their bones actually weaken quite quickly. So, which has been an avenue for osteoporosis drug research and other things like that. We're not working on the osteoporosis part, more on the advanced aging, some work in the blood-brain barrier, how zero gravity affects that, and some others.
Very cool.
Yeah, and those really fall under again that kind of again very much research that very much could move into kind of the development side of R&D, and then we have customers that are more on the development side, or what we would almost kind of call pilot manufacturing side, where, in its simplest form is you're taking a raw material up and the manufacturing process requires zero gravity for one reason or another. And then it's something of value is coming back. And obviously it's got to be, a pretty high value to justify the arc of spaceflight. But to go back to kind of the motivation of the company is develop a portfolio of those applications, of those high value uses. And we were very lucky. We got actually some NASA funding with just an incredible group of partners to work on a couple of applications like that. One of those is a group called Lambda Vision that uses a particular protein that is a very efficient proton pump and a layering process that we've worked on with them to create a retinal implant is actually what they make. Lambda Vision is, they're out of Connecticut. And that technology, we're, working with them on using that for a couple of other different technologies. And what you need is extremely even layering of these particular proteins. And on Earth, the proteins settle out of a beaker or whatever container they're in. You need a still homogeneous fluid for that layering. And how do you get a still homogeneous fluid? You get rid of density, which is you get rid of gravity. And so while that seems kind of, that's a simple, you can walk through that environment, that zero gravity allows for this even layering. And then that has to occur so many times. And it's a great example, obviously, potentially could restore eyesight. So we're working with them, working with a group out of Cedars-Sinai, looking at maintaining pluripotency. So of stem cells. So stem cells are, obviously talked about for, in a lot of applications, but are effectively, cells of you at kind of day zero, if you want to think about it, that you can differentiate into a number of different cell types. And pluripotency is basically maintaining that zero state. And, as it's been kind of told to us, obviously don't work in the industry, but as we've worked with the group at Cedars and others, as you culture these in different vessels, as they proliferate, gravity pulls on them, they settle somewhere, that creates a stressor, and they begin to differentiate. And what you're looking at is maintaining a large kind of bank, for lack of a better term, of pluripotent stem cells from a particular patient for use in treatments that they're looking at, whether it's using gene editing or other things like that for potential kind of next generation treatment. So it's really, where zero gravity comes in is it's kind of providing the stock for that. And there's a lot of work in that. I mean, there is, years or a decade or more of work in even that back end of those applications. But it's really interesting to work with that group. And then, working with this Sanford Consortium for Regenerative Medicine out of San Diego, which is a great collaboration of teams there working on similar things in the stem cell area, stem cell and regenerative medicine areas. And so we're really working with those groups. We're actually working with them earlier today on the reactors, the type of supply chain that they need for some of these applications. And so, you can kind of see that spectrum of between kind of what I call blue ocean research to some of these really complex research and development or even pilot manufacturing applications. And, we've worked with groups that have done fiber optic cable, talking with, working with a group on, recellularization, actually liver recellularization, which was really interesting. That was very early. So it's, if you're a science or technology nerd, I mean, it's really the spectrum of things that we get to work on. And it's one of these that you have, now that space flight and the opportunity to go to space is much lower, now people's ideas start to generate, kind of this ideation begins to happen. And some of these things that you wouldn't think are realistic are now starting to pop up. And it's a lot of fun to actually get to interact with that and eventually see some of these things fly and operate. And one of those, the retinal implant one, will be flying in about 5 or 6 weeks. So we'll be watching that on these screens here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and you said it there, the cost of getting into space, there's more opportunity for people to come with more ideas. And I think that's what really is getting me excited about the future, is the opportunity for more businesses like yourself to pop up where they're commercializing space. So I kind of want to take this and talk about the business aspect of running a space company, more or less. So to start, talk a little bit about, where the funding for the company first came from when you guys first started and where the revenue for the company comes from.
Yeah, sure. So, we... and I talked a little bit about kind of Kentucky Space transitioning into Space Tango. And so we were started under the Kentucky Science and Technology Corporation. We got and started to get a few customers, kind of early education customers. We raised a little bit of money, kind of local friends and family money. And that really got us going. And we actually were able to kind of make the hop from kind of the blue ocean research area into kind of that next phase of the NIH and SF work. And that really allowed us to become self-sustaining for the last couple of years. And so we've only raised that kind of friends and family round of money. And, we've been lucky. We've been a profitable company for a couple of years. And, we basically doubled in terms of revenue and headcount and a lot of other things for the last 2 or 3 years.
What is the headcount currently at?
I think we're at, because I signed some letters today, so I think we're at 25 or 30. Nice. Yeah, awesome. Yeah. And we've got people in La Jolla, California, Houston, Cape Canaveral, and DC, and Washington, D.C. So most people are here in Lexington. I'd say 20 to 25 of them are here in Lexington, but we are pretty distributed, and that's something you have to have in something that's obviously kind of hard science and space. You need people in those centers. You have to have people on the ground, for us to be successable.
I don't know if you can give this number, but what is the just entry level price with you all to even get something up there?
Yeah. So for us, right now it's probably $25,000. Okay. And part of that is, it might not sound hard to say, let's say fly and grow a plant up in space, but, the amount of testing and the amount of iteration in the parts and all that other stuff and then the other thing is one thing that we're trying to do as we mature as a company is really focus on some of these applications. And so there's an opportunity cost because, there is, as the commercialization of space occurs more and more, pricing has to occur more in the supply chain. Right now, as part of the national laboratory and part of the research that we do, you're not paying for every part of that supply chain, and so you're taking the spot of something else, right? And so you've got to price that in there. So for us, it starts from 25 and then goes up from there.
Yeah, you were just talking briefly there about the commercialization of space in general. So let's transition from Space Tango to that, because we do want to touch on that just for a little while, because it is very fascinating. I've been enjoying watching Blue Origin and SpaceX and some of these players send stuff up into space. So talk about when did commercialization start to happen?
Yeah.
It was under the Obama administration, right? Or was it not?
Well, it's it's one of these things you can always kind of keep going back and back. So, some would say, and this is actually a good example I got when we were starting the company, is they tried to commercialize, space in the early 80s with the space shuttle. Pepsi and Coke had done some work there. I believe Pepsi had. They actually done some like early manufacturing of like absolutely perfect ball bearings, and there was some drug work with I can't believe quite who in like the early 85. So pre-Challenger. So you could kind of say it kind of started there. Now, why did it didn't work then? Because you didn't have the miniaturization and automation that we have now. And so everything was very manual, and it's hard to do these complex processes, with astronauts that you can't be there with. And so that's probably what maybe hindered that. Yeah, and then I think a lot, once Challenger happened, that kind of lost some wind. Then you had, you could trace it back to the best I remember of my career, is that under the Bush administration, they started what was, I believe, called COTS, which started the resupply of the space station with commercial companies, and SpaceX and Orbital, and I think a company called not Crystal, but something else like that. Like in 2007, 8, 9, got a company got those contracts a real amount of money to take basically paper designs to, and that's what really funded, I believe, the Dragon and the Falcon 9. I'm sure some SpaceX historians will know that one a little bit better. That's probably the first tangible one. It was under the Bush administration. Then under the Obama administration, they started really the Crew program, which is what has gotten a lot of attention lately, which is flying crew under, and SpaceX has won that. Boeing has something working, the Starliner, which they're about to deploy, and then there's now another cargo vessel called the Dream Chaser with Sierra Nevada. So there's a couple of different vehicles there, and that's really on the kind of the space station human spaceflight side. And then on the satellite side, which is where I kind of grew out of, really CubeSats started that commercialization. So those really small satellites, what they found was you can't make them super small, but there is instead of a tissue box, something, maybe the size of a loaf of bread is the right size. And a number of companies have come out of that industry and have created kind of these nodes of Earth sensing or communications. So, satellites are, you can really only do two things with satellites. You can communicate or you can observe with a satellite. They just basically use high ground. Basically just think of them as, really tall cell towers. And a number of companies have kind of split the electromagnetic spectrum into different sections. And there's a company called Planet that I knew the team when they were getting started, that I think photos the entire Earth every 24 hours, basically creates a fingerprint of Earth. Company, there's some doing synthetic aperture radar. So, synthetic aperture radar is great because you can see through clouds, you can see at night, all the other stuff like that. There's, really cool, interesting things you can do with that. So, the way to kind of think about it is, with the rockets and everything else like that, the example you could use is really kind of the internet effectively, is that, you had broadband or dial-up internet in the 90s, and, the price for which, kind of the average American could pay, the only thing you could really do with the internet was maybe, basic email or maybe some some data storage, but you really couldn't do anything worthwhile. And then, again, there's probably a better metric for this, but, in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, the knee and the curve changed, and you could stream, or you could start to stream, stuff, or you could really download images. And so then you could build, commerce, social, you could build video streaming, you could build all these other things on top of the internet, broadband infrastructure. And the companies now have been built on top of that backbone are now worth, trillions. Whereas, basically the telecoms are not worth as much. Think of AT&T or Verizon or any of these others versus an Amazon or Facebook or a Google. And, you can use that example. Obviously, the numbers are different, but now that there are more players in space flight, the cost to get this and the opportunities are less. And now you're seeing companies build on top of that infrastructure. And SpaceX is the glowing example of that for a lot of reasons. But you've got, these small satellite companies. You've got companies like Axiom who are building commercial space stations and potentially private astronaut missions. All different types of things like that. And we really see ourselves as one of those companies building on top of that base infrastructure.
That's something that Evan and I talk about a lot. With software, it's like it's like building blocks. You have the base software, and you kind of mentioned it there with the internet. Platforms get built on top of the internet, and then more businesses get built on top of those platforms. It seems like that's what's happening with space. All these businesses are coming to space, and you're now able to build these wild companies that you wouldn't have even dreamed of before these companies existed. So let's kind of dive into what are some of the most innovative and exciting companies that are being built that are quote unquote space companies. What are some that come to mind whenever I say that?
Sure. I just because I know of them a little bit better, but the Planet group doing that, imaging of the Earth every 24 hours, it's one of those things that doesn't sound like, who cares or why does that matter? But then now you're able to get a fingerprint of like wildfires, of seeing wildfires, take out different areas, or an amazing one was they had comparisons of when unfortunately that explosion happened in Beirut, Lebanon, a couple months ago. You could see the day before and the day after, and just the devastation. And so looking at whether it's from climate, human development, what does that do to human rights? The technologies are going to happen, and then how does society kind of respond to that? And so now that we can see, human rights groups can see what's happening in a certain area, is really interesting. And again, kind of getting that the fingerprint of Earth every day is something that it's good to know. Now, what do we do with it? We'll see. The reusability of rockets is really interesting. Again, SpaceX in a lot of ways is the kind of crown jewel of that with their Falcon 9 and Starship work. The Starship stuff that happened just a couple of weeks ago is just
so fun to watch.
Oh my gosh.
It's so fun to watch from an engineering standpoint, but at the same point, it just for a lot of people, it's a thing to make you feel happy about the future. Now, going to Mars and all that other stuff, but that technology is progressing. I think is amazing, and the fact they did that, and then the way they've done it, and basically just welding stainless steel together. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but welding stainless steel together in tents down in south of Texas, I mean, is really just incredible. So those are really interesting. Those two really take it right now. It's weird. Obviously not having traveled like most of the world. I really enjoy kind of industry conferences because you get to see what the new things and where people are and stuff like that. So having not done that for over a year, I feel a little bit out of touch. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One of the ones that I've been talking about a lot, and I actually wrote a blog about this just because I think it pertains to Kentucky a lot, is SpaceX's Starlink project. Yeah. So just the fact that, and I'd love to get your opinion on this as well. Yeah. Having the satellite internet and having essentially a blanket of internet across the earth, I think is going to be huge for areas like Kentucky and rural areas, because we've had such a problem getting that broadband internet, that they call it the last mile, getting it to the communities that need it so bad. So my kind of theory or hypothesis that I believe is this is a huge opportunity for Kentucky, rural Kentucky, and other rural areas, is that it's going to be huge for businesses. It's going to be huge for education, remote work, all of these industries that have kind of been left behind because the internet is essentially the new land of opportunity here in 2021. Do you see that same thing happening with, all of these companies providing that internet service to rural areas? Is that going to be huge as I think it's going to be for Kentucky?
Yeah. I think so. They've just rolled out some of that stuff in beta. And you have to be in like real remote areas right now to get like a Starlink beta. It seems like it's working. I don't know anybody who has it. and it's a good, I didn't grow up, I grew up on a farm, but it was like a mile outside of Bardstown, but we had satellite internet in the mid 90s. And, now it went off a geostationary satellite. So your lag time was a lot worse because you're going, instead of maybe 300 kilometers out, you're going, I believe, 23,000 kilometers out. And so in both ways. So, their kind of architecture of a high density, low orbit system makes a lot of sense. And I do, I think what it'll do is it basically is creating almost a, moving the internet kind of as a cloud above the Earth. What's going to be interesting is how much that gets regulated in terms of an orbital debris issue, because that's, orbital debris, a little bit like, you could draw analogies to climate change, is kind of the great tragedy of the commons, in the sense that, that's not a problem until it's a problem. And
what's the effect called when it's a chain of reaction?
Yeah, I cannot think of that right now.
Yeah, I saw that.
But basically, it's it's a exponential increase in orbital debris when things hit each other. Two satellites. A spacecraft is typically going about 17,500 miles an hour. If you're hitting at a 45-degree angle, that's you're hitting at Mach 25.
Kessler syndrome.
Yeah, the Kessler. Yeah. And it's one of those things. Those have happened a couple of times. There have been direct impacts. There were some numbers I had seen, so don't quote me on these, but there was a Russian and a Iridium satellite that collided in like 2010. And then the Chinese shut down a satellite in like 2007. And something like 30% of all debris tracked is like from those two events or something like that. And as I said, it's not a problem till it's a problem. Something really hits, and then you've got some problem.
Aren't they requiring now that when you do send up a satellite, you have to have a way to get it back?
They do, but it is, when we were launching satellites, it was 25 years. Now the last satellite that I worked on was pretty big and didn't weigh a lot, so it had its ballistic coefficient it came in pretty quick. Because they're still kind of wisped the atmosphere up until about 500 kilometers. So it came back home pretty quick. So yes, I'm very, to your original question, I do think it's great for rural communities. It brings kind of an even opportunity potentially. You still have to pay, it's still not free. You still got to pay, I believe, a couple $100s for the terminal and then a monthly fee. So it's not like anybody can connect with it with their phones. There's still a fee, but it will expand opportunity, which is great. But taking kind of the hat of the space person, if you've got this kind of cloud at a couple 100 kilometers above the Earth, just how we deal with that if we're trying to, send stuff to the moon or anything else like that. Now, for us, Space Tango, we're pretty orbit agnostic. We just need to get, again, to microgravity. And so all of our stuff would be below any of these kind of constellations. Amazon has a competing one. OneWeb is doing some work in there. So there's a couple different ones, but due to the vertical integration, SpaceX really has the upper hand.
And do they have a major upper hand because of also the fact that they've got the cheapest rockets? Because they can, if they own the rocket, then that's their advantage, because they can launch their own rockets and it's cheaper than if somebody has to pay them.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got the reusability. There's a lot of effects there that make
vertical integration that Elon Musk has done continuously throughout these different industries.
It's hard, but it makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Let's transition from space to Lexington here locally, and let's talk about the local community. What's it been like growing a space company in Kentucky? What could be done? What has Kentucky helped you with, and what could Kentucky do better?
Yeah, sure. I think the thing I've liked about it is two things. One is it took us a while to figure out who we were. Years. It's not like it took 3 or 4 months. And if you were in a more traditional accelerator or a more traditional kind of venture area, spent a lot of time in the Bay Area. It's great, networking out there and meeting investors and talking to different founders and operators out there, because of just, it's the industry, whether it's, whatever company.
It's the culture.
It's the culture, and that's what people talk about. You can just learn, incredible amount. But it would have been pushed to figure out, who the hell are you? And it took us a while. And it took us a while because, as we talked about, you got to fly to figure out, what you can do and what you can't do, or what's possible, what's not possible. And that just, when you flying very frequently, but when you're flying 3, 6, 8 times a year, just, takes you a couple of years to figure that out. So I think that was a really good thing. It took time to kind of think of the idea and see where it can go. And the other thing I liked about it was you can kind of, for lack of a hide in plain sight. Not that we were in stealth and anything else like that, but you didn't get a lot of attention.
You could work without distraction.
Yeah. But again, you have to have that, the right dynamic of, maybe not being in a traditional place, but still having some tie to whether it's, Silicon Valley, Boston, and life sciences. Austin has a lot. New York, you can go into different areas where there is more of a tech scene. And like I said, even just having like little pilgrimages every once in a while are really, really good, just to get the feel, what people are talking about, everything else like that.
And the first point you made, where you were talking about, you're able to figure out the model and you're able to take your time with that.
Yeah.
Was that a comment to the fact that the cost of living and the cost of doing business here in Kentucky allowed you to have that runway?
I think so. I don't know the cost of living, how much. I go back and forth how much that's a factor. Yeah. I think that kind of evens out whether it's you have more resources to capital in a higher cost place. You've got obviously potentially maybe more talent or more experience in other areas. So I go back and forth that the cost of living kind of equals itself out. I mean, it's,
there's a market there.
There's a market, exactly. I mean, financial firms start typically in the New York area. I know, typically people start things in the Bay Area, technology or particularly SaaS companies. I know there's a little bit of distribution now during COVID. We'll see how that settles. So I just wonder if that all kind of comes out in the wash. You start typically aerospace companies are in the Los Angeles area.
I think it'll take time to figure out if that comes out in the wash.
Yeah, I just don't. I go back and forth on that.
Like
I don't
Austin,
have a hard answer.
Yeah, Austin and Miami are like experiments kind of going on right now.
Yeah,
and we'll see how those play out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so I got to meet some of your interns at lunch the other day. Shout out to Chess, Trevor, and Jaya.
That's right.
So that question, just how has it been finding talent here? Are you mostly pulling from UK, or
Yeah.
how has it been finding the employees?
It's been strange. I feel very lucky. We have had, I don't want to say no problem, but we have not had much problem finding talented people.
That's awesome. That's good to hear.
We've had people, great people, whether it's in engineering or other areas, come to us. We've hired, we have a lot from UK. We have some from Moorhead. We, some from U of L, some from Embry-Riddle. I'm just trying to think of every different place we've had interns and employees. So we've had people move here. We hire remote, but we have not really had much of an issue finding people. We have people with space experience, or particularly even space station experience. So you want to, and this is with any company, how much do you, obviously bringing experienced people, how much do you invest in younger people because of what you're doing is so unique? You want to give them a little bit, kind of mold them into the fashion of the company. So that's always a dynamic that we talk about, but knock on wood, haven't had much of an issue, and catch up with a lot of different people. And we always really think about, we're kind of really in a phase of kind of rapid expansion. Where do we bring in more senior people, other things like that to help the company grow? Because as we're growing, certainly as an engineer, my focus is very much on the product side. That's kind of the goggles I look at things. People might see it from a financial or a purely management or process. I say, I really look at things of, is the gadget there to do something? And as we're growing, I'm, certainly trying to step away from some of the day-to-day engineering, but still stay in more of the strategic, what things do we need to develop in the next year or so to do those type of things.
What kind of engineers are you hiring? Are they electrical, computer? I'm sure it's a mixture, but what's the density look like as far as the distribution of?
You could think it's probably, it's a decent amount of MEs lately. We're really, I'm trying to come up with numbers, maybe 40 mechanical-ish, because there's even subsets of mechanical, 40 electrical, and then probably 20 software, 20% software. But we've got some people with biomedical. Even as I'm talking here, I'm thinking people have other like master's degrees. We need just a combination of, mechanical, biomedical, electrical, embedded systems. Really, the marrying of both electrical and software. We've got a great group of guys we work with there. Really any engineers, yeah. And scientists, we're really looking to expand our science group here. We very much started in engineering. We're really trying to build out that science group just with the customers that we're working with and where we see value the microgravity brings.
So before we get to our final questions here as we wrap up, I've got 3 rapid fire questions that are just kind of the nerd in me that wants them answered. No. So the first one is, have you met Elon?
I've not met Elon. I've been in the same room about this size twice with him.
That's close. That's close enough for me.
It was fun.
I view him as an alien, so I'm just wondering, like, if I was in your shoes and I was in a room with Elon, like, would I just keep looking at him to see what he looks like? And, like,
no, I mean,
just normal.
Looks
normal
like what you think. These voices. Okay. And that was a couple of years. I think, again, dating this conversation, I think he became, the most wealthy, the wealthiest person in the world today. This was, probably both times were 8-10 years ago almost. Yeah. So he was not the person he is now. No, I haven't. And same with Bezos. I was in a room with him. But
that's still pretty cool.
Yeah. And that was only a couple of years ago.
All right. The last 2, and I'll just rapid fire these 2. Yeah. One, do you call yourself a space entrepreneur? And the last one, are you going to space if you get the opportunity?
Yeah. I don't call myself a space entrepreneur.
You should.
Yeah. I don't know. I think when I got started in this, everybody thinks you're lying or being making it up. Or I'm trying to think of stronger wording I can say on here. So I honestly, I say I'm an engineer. And if people ask more, I'll get into it. But I have to say, if you ever met somebody and they opened with that, you probably wouldn't have the best opinion of them. So I don't go there unless somebody really asks. And then would I go to space? Yeah, I would.
Okay.
Yeah,
so that's the right answer.
Virgin Galactic, is that how you see it happening, or is there?
I don't know. I certainly cheer for all of them. I think the tourism part is probably the Blue Origin method. I know Virgin had a recent a test that didn't go well, but that which is why you test. But either one, once they get them certified, honestly, obviously this is in like a fantasy world. It would be good to do an orbit. Actually go around the Earth and see it instead of just kind of going straight up and seeing. So that would be fun. But yeah, I would certainly go. Having known people who work at SpaceX and worked with those teams and the Northrop Grumman teams and others like that, they're really great. And some of the NASA people, the safety and the professionalism all those groups have is, I would have no problem with that.
Well, take bourbon with you when you go. Some part of Kentucky, take it with you.
It depends on which flight. So. Yeah.
All right. So we always like to end on a forward-looking statement here. Yeah. So talk a little bit about where is Space Tango heading into the future?
Yeah. So, we've had a couple of things at a corporate level and the growth that we've had really give us a solid foundation below us. We're certainly an early stage company. But the 3 big things I think we're looking for in starting in 2021 is really vertically integrate those applications that we have with some of the partners that we have, work with them or either internally develop other of those use cases as we've gotten experience. The second is kind of a second revision of our product line. We use these cube labs and these blockers that you see behind us. We've got ideas on what the next generation of that looks like that is kind of optimized for the space station supply chain, which is, I've kind of used that phrase a couple of times, but it's basically what I talked about earlier, which is that safety and integration, working with the visiting vehicles, working with the space station, the astronauts. It's kind of optimized for that because there's, whether they're direct cost or not, what you get penalized for. So we want to do that. And then third is really start to think about what does a production supply chain look like? Whether it's using the space station, whether it's using commercial space stations, whether it's using, we have a concept for our own spacecraft that is that is its own reentry vehicle. Really exploring that, which one. I'm clearly a fan of vertical integration as well. At what point does that make sense? At what point does it? Really figure that out. So that was a long answer to the where Space Tango go, but it's those kind of three areas.
No, that's perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Yeah,
this was one of probably my favorite interviews. I'm just a space geek anyway. I've always been interested in space.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, and good luck to you guys as you continue to grow.
Well, and I appreciate what you guys are doing, with this podcast and getting this out. And, nothing like this was around a couple of years ago when we were getting this started. So I appreciate you guys coming here and the podcast you all have.